Hey guys, Moms Against Medical Bullying. So today I'm just going to go over another section in the book Crucial Conversations. And some might wonder, why would I be talking about this book on a channel called Moms Against Medical Bullying? Well, the reason is because I feel like this book can help us, when you're encountering bullying or you have to speak up for yourself, it's important that we know how to speak without becoming intensely and highly charged. When we're in the middle of that place where we're being bullied, we're having a very charged encounter with one of these medical professionals, right? I think that's important for us to grab a hold of ourselves and speak in a stern and calm and direct and healthy way, because I feel like we always want to maintain our composure, I think that's important. Because, nobody wants to be called crazy, right? Not only just because you don't want to be called crazy, but I think it's helpful for the person using those skills. You know what I mean? To be able to take a step back inside and to regain that self-control. Even though, your adrenaline starts to rush and everything, you want to be able to maintain a sense of self-control, especially in front of these types of people, because they're dangerous. So when you're encountering this medical bullying, you're already in a dangerous situation, So maintaining self-composure, I think, is important. So what I wanted to go over today was just the types of stories that we tell ourselves in certain situations. Now, I'm not saying that these stories are going to apply to a situation like you would have in medical bullying. But I think, like I said before, just that aspect from this book about taking a step back, having some thought so that your body can have a chance to just kind of take it down a notch, right? Instead of just going in that fight or flight mode, and instead of acting into that fight or flight mode. But in terms of these clever stories, I mean, it might apply, it might not, I don't know. But the clever stories wasn't really in reference to that type of scenario, although maybe somebody could apply it in that type of scenario. Also, I just want to say that when I go over clever stories, I am not talking, this is kind of like a disclaimer, I'm not talking about anybody who's actually been an innocent victim. If you've been abused, if you've been held at gunpoint, if you've been raped, things where you've been factually a victim of, of a crime. I'm not talking to that type of a group of people. This type of stuff is for you're having trouble at work with your boss, you're having trouble with your coworkers, you need better communication with your spouse or your children, this is not for people who have been victims of crimes, okay? I just wanted to put that out there. All right, so there's three clever stories that they give example of, three types of clever stories that they give examples of. So a clever story is a story which entertains the sucker's choice. So basically when somebody makes up a clever story, it's like a gateway into choosing either silence or violence. So I talked about silence and violence in one of my previous videos. So yeah, if you want to watch that, I made a little playlist for this book. So number one is the victim stories. So innocent sufferers, not talking about innocent, okay. Sorry, I'm reading my notes here and I'm gonna, all right, so I already said that because this is not talking about innocent victims or people who factually get wronged. So when you ignore the role you played in a problem, you create victim stories. So again, victim stories is when you ignore the problem or when you ignore the role that you have played in the problem, right? You act like you're the victim, everything's happening to you. You make a lot of excuses. So when we make mistakes, we claim our intentions were innocent and pure instead of owning up to the mistake that we made. We just make excuses for them. All right, so that's the victim, tales of victimization. Then number two is the villain story. So that's when you turn normal people into evil guys, into bad guys, by imputing motive onto them. So you observe their factual actions and you have imputed an evil motive onto why they're doing what they're doing. So in the villain story, we exaggerate our own innocence and we overemphasize the other person's guilt. All right, so labeling is a common device used in villain stories because it dehumanizes a person and gives you a reason to treat them poorly. So yeah, basically somebody does something and then you create a story around that, and you create a story around their possible motives around their actions, and use labeling to dehumanize them so that you can either react with violence, really, which is because labeling is under violence. So villain stories set us up to carry out violence because villains deserve it, right? So if you have somebody's done something and you label them, the book gave an example of, like, hold on a sec. So the example they give is, I can't believe that bonehead gave me bad materials again. And then they say, by employing the handy label of bonehead, now we're not dealing with a complex human being, but with what you labeled them as. So not only do villain stories help us blame others for bad results, but they also set us up to do whatever we want to the villains. So these two seem to have their root in, one, not taking responsibility, not taking ownership, and two, in blaming others for everything. So victim stories are for when others have been hurt by us, right? We say, let me read the example they give. So an example of a victim story would be, sure, I was late getting home and didn't call you, but I couldn't let the team down. So instead of this person just taking ownership and say, yeah, I was late, they're just trying to, state their innocence, right? Then it says, on the other hand, when others do things that hurt us, we tell villain stories, which are when we invent terrible motives for the others based on how their actions affected us. You are so thoughtless. You could have called me and told me that you were going to be late. So yeah. Then we have helpless stories. In these fabrications, we make ourselves to be powerless. We justify poor actions because, after all, there was nothing we could do. It justifies us partaking in silence or violence because of helplessness, or saying that there is no other way the situation could be addressed. And the example they give is, I had to, if I didn't yell at my son, he wouldn't listen. Or if I told my husband this, he would be defensive. So one uses violence, the other one uses silence. While villain and victim stories look back to explain why we were in the situation we are in, helpless stories look forward to explain why we can't do anything to change our situation. It's particularly easy to act helpless when we turn others' behavior into fixed and unchangeable traits. For example, when we decide our boss is a control freak, which is a villain story, we are less inclined to give him feedback because, after all, control freaks like him don't accept feedback. So then that's villain story with a helpless story as well. So as you can see, helpless stories often stem from villain stories and typically offer us nothing more than sucker's choice, silence or violence. So in conclusion, why do we tell ourselves clever stories? They say, one, because they actually match reality, which they say this happens, but it's not common. Those are those situations where people actually are innocent victims of crimes. Two, they get us off the hook, from taking personal responsibility. Three, they keep us from acknowledging our sellouts. So what is an example of a sellout? It says we sell out when we consciously act against our own sense of what is right. So some examples are, you believe you should help someone, but you don't. You believe you should apologize, but you don't. You believe you should stay late to finish up a commitment, but go home. You fail to complete an assignment on time and believe you should let others know, but you don't. So anyways, yeah. So again, when we sell out, we consciously act against our own sense of what is right. So what do we do? What do we do about these clever stories that we tell ourselves? So one, they say retrace your path. By noticing your behavior, are you in silence or violence? So are you masking, avoiding, using sarcasm? Are you name calling? Are you taking pot shots at people? Identify what emotions are causing these actions. Question your conclusions and look for other explanations. Question the stories that you have told yourself about this person's motives and see if there's any other reasons that person could possibly be doing what they're doing. Why would a reasonable person be, doing the actions that they're doing? Two, yeah. So two is, watch for clever stories. Again, that kind of ties in with asking yourself why a person would do what they do, to kind of rethink the story that you've created about their actions. Tell the rest of the story. So tell the rest of the story by asking, what is my role in the problem? Why would a reasonable person do this? What do I want? And what would I do if I wanted those results right now? So they say in telling the rest of the story, when you ask yourself, am I pretending not to notice my role in the problem? that, it brings you out of being a victim into being an actor. So it says this question jars you into facing up to the fact that maybe, just maybe, you did something to help cause a problem. Instead of being a victim, you're an actor. This doesn't necessarily mean you had malicious motives. Perhaps your contribution was merely a thoughtless omission. Nonetheless, you contributed. For example, a coworker constantly leaves the harder or noxious tasks for you to complete. You frequently complain to friends and loved ones about being exploited. The parts you leave out of the story are that you smile broadly when your boss compliments you for your willingness to take on challenging jobs, and you've never said anything to your coworkers. You've hinted, but that's about it. So you're acting like you're a victim when and then when you look at your boss, you act like you're so pleased to take on these jobs, right? The first step in telling the rest of the story would be to add these important facts to your account. By asking what role you have played, you begin to realize how selective your perception has been. You become aware of how you've minimized your own mistakes while you've exaggerated the roles of others. Secondly, in telling the rest of the story, you can turn villains into humans. So when you find yourself labeling or otherwise vilifying others, stop and ask yourself, why would a reasonable, rational, and decent person do what this person is doing? This particular question humanizes others. As we search for plausible answers to it, our emotions begin to soften. Empathy often replaces judgment, and depending on how we've treated others, personal accountability replaces self-justification. For instance, that coworker who seems to conveniently miss out on tough jobs told you recently that she could see you were struggling with an important assignment, and yesterday she pitched in and completed the job for you. You were instantly suspicious. She was trying to make you look bad by completing a high-profile job. All right. But what if she really were a reasonable, rational, and decent person? What if she had no motive other than to give you a hand? Our purpose for asking why a reasonable, rational, and decent person might be acting a certain way is not to excuse others for any bad things that they may be doing. If they are indeed guilty, we'll have time to deal with that later. The purpose of this, of the humanizing question, is to deal with our own stories and emotions. It provides us with still another tool for working on ourselves by first providing a variety of possible reasons for the other person's behavior. So this says, as we tell the rest of the story, we free ourselves from the poisoning effects of unhealthy emotions. Best of all, as we regain control and move back to dialogue, we become masters of our own emotions rather than hostages.